Hey there, YouTube. Welcome back. This is the Allegheny Northern in N scale, and we're coming up on the end of 2024 here. But before we close out the year, we've got two more videos for you. The one is going to be obviously this one, which we are going to be talking about the most recent polls that we took off from the communities tab of the channel's page. And the question was, if you're not running DCC, what made you choose DC Power for your layout? And then we've got one more video for the year that is going to be the December layout update. And then when we come back in January, going to be a whole new format, whole new deal for the brand new year. But to get us from here to there, let's talk about the results of that poll. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this video. I'm going to try and keep the microphone away from my beard. Yes, in the winter I grow a beard, and in the last video, a lot of you noticed that scratching noise. That was the microphone rubbing against my beard. And there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it because I had filmed everything, gone to edit it, and by the time I realized that we had beard action in the microphone, it was too late to go back and re-edit the shot. So you got to hear my beard through most of that video. So this video, I'm going to use one hand to hold the microphone away, because anytime I move, the microphone literally sits right there because it's right by my mouth, and yeah, so anyway. But, okay, I think we fixed that problem, but let's talk about the poll results and what y'all had to say about why you're running DC Power over DC. Okay, so before we get into it too far, let's go through the four options that you had available to you. So option number one was, if you're not running DCC, what made you choose DC Power for your layout? Option one was money. DCC is expensive. And out of 108 votes, 50% of you chose that option. So that's not really much of a surprise. DCC is a bit expensive, and there's a lot to it because it's not just the control system, it's the control system, it's the boosters, it's the specialty auto reversers, it is the decoders themselves, and if you go sound, it's all of the sound equipment, decoders, and that sort of stuff. So there is a lot of pricing considerations there. Okay, the other one is skill. DCC scares me. It's called that extra C that DC doesn't. And 9% of you said that. So out of 108, 9% of you were in the group of, hey, I don't know if I have the skills for this. And honestly, I thought more folks would be in that. I thought that was going to have a higher percentage. And that's only because that was my experience. DCC was very intimidating. It's got its own set of language. It's got its own set of programming. It's got its own set of pretty much everything. And if you don't speak DCC, when you start reading the pamphlets and the documents and all the things that it can do, it is absolutely intimidating. It is crazy how involved it is. And I thought that was going to scare more people away from DCC. Like, they wanted all the features. They just were like, I don't know if I can do all that. And there's still a whole lot in DCC that even I don't understand. But there is definitely a lot of resources out there that take that scary part and make it way easier. And one of the things that I found out was my Digitrax system, way easier than some of the other systems out there. It takes a lot of the CV programming and kind of dumbs it down so that even somebody who doesn't know it can learn it relatively quick. So for you 9%, don't let that scare you. There's definitely enough resources out there, this channel being one of them, other channels on YouTube, and even the paperwork that comes with the equipment is pretty well described. And so if you have just a small inkling of computer knowledge, you are going to be way ahead of somebody who doesn't. So for you 9%, don't let that scare you. Okay, the other option was size. I don't need all them fancy bells and whistles, quite literally, because you're not going to get bells and whistles with DC. Yes, there are some locomotives and there are some decoders that offer limited sound options under DC, but to actually have control over them, you need a control feature, and that control feature and that control methodology comes through the decoder and through the digital command. So without that, DC just doesn't have that option, at least not per locomotive. Yes, you can go with the something like the sound box from Kato, and it'll offer you some sounds, but it's not, you're not controlling the sound of a particular locomotive. You're just basically providing ambient sound. Now, the sound box does, as you throttle up, you can connect to your throttle, and as you throttle up, the sounds will increase, etc., etc. So it's kind of linked. So if you have a small layout, that might actually sound pretty decent. But if you got a giant basement size Empire, it's just not going to be enough to provide that sound. You could provide ambient sound in other ways through a speaker system and just play train sounds, but it's not going to be that locomotive, and it's not going to sound to what your locomotive is doing. So if that matters to you, you're just not going to get that through DCC. So, but with size, I feel a lot of people think that if you don't have a giant layout, you don't need DCC. Well, DCC allows you to operate multiple locomotives in multiple directions on the same layout. And so even if you have a small layout, even if it's a switching layout, DCC will allow you to operate two locomotives, which is common in switching activities, where you can have a locomotive on the front end and on the back end. They can be paired together or consisted, and you can do some pretty cool things with them. So if you're just somebody that says, I don't need it because my layout's too small, you can't, it's not size dependent. You can get different systems at different price points for different size layouts, and those systems, some of them are expandable. So, don't get stuck in the size standpoint. So 17% of you said your layout didn't meet the size requirements for DCC, and there is no size requirement for DCC. So if you want that functionality, you want that control, you want that sound, doesn't really matter how big your layout is, you can get it. And then 24% of you picked the last option, which was, fine, I'm doing it. See, I'm buying my DCC starter system now. Come on, man. So 24% of you are in the process of making that conversion. So, okay, let's talk about DC versus DCC in general. And this is not a video to shame you for one system or another, because both systems are tried and true, and both systems work. And so whichever you choose, or whichever you feel is appropriate, is absolutely appropriate. So let's talk about the end results here. Okay, so the bells and the whistles are going to cost you a pretty penny. So for those of you who know that Kato released the big boy, as did a few other manufacturers this year in N scale, and of course if you wanted DCC and sound, you were going to drop close to $500 when all was said and done. Now, that's an extreme case as far as locomotives go, because not all of them are priced at that range. However, you do pay a lot more for locomotives. So if you are on a budget, DCC and sound and a big locomotive, probably not the best route to take. Now, I do know that you can get a DC locomotive from Atlas, one of their new releases, and you're going to pay, let's say, around $90, probably $100 once you add in Uncle Sam and shipping if you're not picking it up in the store. So they are a lot cheaper to go DC as opposed to DCC, where in DCC you're going to pay probably around $200 per locomotive. So in our case here, the newest locomotive added was this Broadway Limited Imports, and it was around $200 all said and done. So yes, you do get the sound and all of the features. In this case, you get all the hassles of Broadway Limited, but you also get the features of sound and the lighting control, etc., etc. Okay, so yes, your locomotives are going to be more expensive, and if those are not features that you either like or want to have, then DCC is probably a waste for you in general. If it is something that you want to have, then you are going to have to pay a little bit more for it, but you can get a standard DC locomotive and make the upgrades yourself. If you haven't done that, a lot of locomotives will have drop-in decoders available, and they kind of take the guesswork out of installing a decoder, because pretty much you take out the light board that's inside and you drop in the DCC decoder and you're set and ready to go, which is not bad. It's actually not a terrible process if you get something like a Digitrax decoder, and you can just simply replace one board for the other. Okay, so that is going to be on your cost side per locomotive. So you're looking at, let's say, $100 a locomotive versus $200 a locomotive, so roughly double. Now, when you go into the operating system of the layout, same kind of situation. You know, where a Zephyr Express system, which I have here, is going to run you in the neighborhood of $200. You can get an MRC power pack for roughly $60 to $80. So there is a lot more involved in this. Plus, you also get the need for boosters on larger layouts, and then you have all of the auto reversing and the fancy stuff that we're doing here, like the automatic turnout control. You don't get that feature with DC, but you also don't get the price tag. So where you may have a layout that has, in this case, several boards at $80 a board, you don't need those on a DC layout. You can use the Atlas components, which are considerably less expensive. So yes, if price is an object for you and you need to be budget conscious, there are smart ways to do DCC that can be somewhat more budget friendly, but in general, DCC is going to cost you more. There's just more programming and computer components and stuff in it that makes it more expensive. Now, yes, there are ways that you can build your own systems and some ways that you can try to save costs, but then that goes into the skill set. So let's talk about skills. DCC is heavy on computer technology and digital technology. So if you don't speak the language, trying to build your own system is probably going to seem daunting. And I have seen folks do it using Arduino components and some other things where they basically have created their own digital command control system. They can do it for pennies on the dollar. Unfortunately, what I've seen with those systems is you have to have a pretty good understanding of some basic computer programming, and it doesn't give you all of the nice interfaces with the CVs that a factory package system does. So yes, you can save money if you know what you're doing or are willing to learn. Otherwise, I would not go down that rabbit hole. That's not something that I personally would do, just because I don't want to learn all of that stuff. And it's just a lot easier to get a factory ready system that is going to just automatically have an interface put into it, no program required, and letting you sort of just do what you got to do. So if you want to go down that route and you really want to get involved with it, there's absolutely no problem with that. Just understand that you're going to have a much larger learning curve in getting from DC to DCC if you decide to build your own system, though you will save money. I haven't looked into it all just because I don't know all of the components that are involved, but it looks like you can build a system for somewhere between I'm going to say a little more than half the cost of say a pre-packaged system. So that could be an option for you if you're tech savvy. So here's one of those things I don't think we talk enough about, and that is the tech savvy side of DCC. And it can be as complicated or as uncomplicated as you want it. So in the effort of trying to save yourself some money, you may go with a Bachmann, I think they call their system the Easy Command. And if you go with that, it's a starter set and it has some limited functions, and it doesn't do all of the same stuff necessarily that an NCE or a Digitrax system would do. be careful with those, although they work and they will give you functionality for a set number of locomotives. I think it's 10 addresses that they handle. They are not expandable. Where NCE, Digitrax, those systems are all expandable to accommodate more addresses, which means more locomotives and more trains. Some of the starter sets don't have that functionality. So before you jump into that, make sure you understand what the system limitations are to the system you are purchasing. Otherwise, you may find out that you outgrow your system and now you are spending a lot more money because you are buying a system twice if you have to expand. In the grounds of expansion here, so this was the initial Zephyr Express. It does offer you one throttle, the soft key commands here, and the programming features. What's nice about this is it does have a quick decoder setup menu, and if you go into that, you can very quickly read and change the basic features of a decoder, and you don't have to get too crazy with it. So if you're just trying to rename a decoder, very simple to do. You don't have to know what CVs to go to. It pretty much tells you what it's going to do, and then it just does it. You can write that command right there. It also has, if you go in here, a CV programmer where you can go to a programming track, and then you can actually tell it which CV number and what you want that data to be. Most of the systems just start you off with this, and they want you to know the CV and the CV data number, and you have to either have a decoder calculator to figure out what that is, or you have to go online and try to find out what the correct numbers are for that. So it's a lot easier to have a Digitrax system, which kind of lets you do the basic programming without having to know how to do basic programming. Okay, so in all of this, the biggest things that I see is people not wanting to take the plunge just because they think it's big and it's scary. And for those folks, I'm with you. I understand where you're coming from. And yes, it's a big investment and it's kind of a scary investment, but once you go down that rabbit hole, you'll never go back. For those of you who are concerned about dollars and cents, I would recommend that you look at some of the starter sets and only a locomotive or two. When I got my starter set, I still had a fairly sizable layout, and it was running on DC, and I left it as DC for a very long time while I collected decoders and I learned how to use the system on a smaller layout, which was basically an oval of track on my dining room table. So if you are going to consider the changes, I would make a recommendation that you would do something similar to that, where you can sort of play with it before you actually implement it layout wide, especially if you've got a layout that's already up and functioning and you have a lot of decoders that you need to purchase and install. So this whole thing has been kind of a pitch for DCC, and the reason being is I was curious as to if you weren't in DCC or you weren't considering it, why not? And I figured that dollars and cents would be the reason most of you didn't want to jump into it. And I mean, that's a perfectly logical reason. If it's going to limit your ability to model what you want to model because of costs, then yeah, that might not be the right option. However, if it's just one of the other options where you're either trying to get into it and just haven't made the plunge, or you'd like to do it but you don't know how, this is more of an encouragement for you to, basically get off your ass and do it, because you will enjoy the benefits. Now, for those of you who are like, I got no interest in the sound, I got no interest in the lighting control, I just basically want to have my locomotive and I want to run my locomotive and just play with my trains on my little layout, and I don't want to have all that other stuff. I don't need all that other stuff. Totally fine. And if you get a locomotive dare I say, like a Broadway Limited, and you will get some functionality from that locomotive. You'll get certain sound effects. You won't be able to control the horn necessarily, but you will get certain sound effects that you can have playing while you're running your trains. It's not a bad way to go. And if the sounds don't mean anything to you and you just want to run your locomotives, you're around, let's say, $100 a locomotive. You can essentially get 2 locomotives for every DCC equipped locomotive. So not a bad average if you're staying with DC. And to say that DC is only a small layout sort of thing, that's not accurate either. I mean, I was running a fairly large layout in DC before I converted, and what made me change was I needed a throttle that I could walk around with, and at the time I couldn't find anything in DC because in most cases you would need some sort of digital receiver or some kind of a receiver on your power pack that could take a wireless signal or a plugged-in signal, and they just really weren't offering anything. Some of the clubs that I had talked to had it, but they custom built them. And once again, I wasn't really into custom building something. So I went with DCC ultimately because I needed the ability to walk around with a handheld throttle. And so in this case, what you heard that beeping earlier was my throttle telling me it was getting ready to shut off. I'm on battery right now. You can see I'm not plugged in, and I'm taking it for a little stroll here around the layout. So when you get to a layout of this size, obviously mine's still under construction, so things are a bit chaotic at the moment, but I can stop this train from right here if I wanted to, so I can obviously control it right here and bring it to a stop, or I can essentially walk away from it while it's stopped and come to the other side of the train room, and if I so chose to make it go again, there's all I've got to do is throttle up and I can run it from anywhere in the room. And you might say, well, why is that so important? Well, it's important because I can follow my train around, which I do like, and I can work all of the industries as my train goes from location to location, and I don't necessarily have to be at it. During open houses, I can walk with my guests and I can interact with my train. When I'm switching, I can walk right up to the industry, so if I have to throw a turnout or whatever. Plus, of course, I can activate the sounds whenever I want to. So that's why I'm in DCC. Before that, I was a dual cab. I had MRC power packs, and I used the Atlas controller for my Ys and reversing sections, and I used the Atlas selector and a shit ton of wires to power all of the blocks. In fact, a lot of the blocks that you will see on this layout that are now part of the DCC circuit breaker blocks were original blocks designed for DC operation. So, you can reuse them, and you can make the conversion pretty quick if you so choose. Okay, so I guess the end result of this is there's not a whole ton of you that aren't in DCC already. And so if you're sitting there thinking, wow, I am missing a whole market, you are. I'm not going to lie to you. You're definitely missing a whole market. You're missing some features that may or may not be important to you. And depending on the size of your layout, you may or may not be missing some freedom to be able to move around with your trains and to be able to sort of have more of an open platform kind of deal. And I think the best thing to do if you're somebody who would like to learn more about DCC and you'd like to learn from somebody who's only been doing DCC for a couple of years now, We're coming up on the end of year 2, actually, and you would like to, you've got some questions or you need some help, why don't you leave comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. I do have a handful of videos up because as I was learning DCC, I wanted to kind of educate you guys and the things that I found as I was going, because I figured out if I found something new, you probably would find that new as well. And so if you've got some questions about getting started and you'll want to know about it, ask away. I'll see if I can help you out. One thing I do have to promise or apologize for is that we created an email address for the channel, and I just realized I haven't looked at it in probably 2 months now. Things got a little hectic with work and the holidays and everything else, and I absolutely completely forgot about it. So if you have an email in there that I have not responded to, because I respond to every one of the emails, I absolutely apologize, and I will apologize again when I reply to your email. I've got to get back in there, and I've got to go and look at what's going on. So all right, I will that's gonna wrap us up for this video, and yes, we definitely want to encourage you to look at some DCC operating systems. I found a lot of freedom and a lot of enjoyment in making the move, and I think you will too. Can't do much about the pricing, but I can talk you into it for the size of your layout and kind of help you through the skills portion of it. And for those of you who made the choice, so those 3 options make up the other 50% of you that are staying away from it due to cost. But for those of you who are just willing to take the plunge and learn on the DCC system, there will be plenty of things coming up here in 2025 that we will be talking about on the channel, and hopefully answer most of your questions and concerns regarding DCC.